The moment I stepped through that front door, I knew. Either I had made the smartest decision of my life or the most costly mistake imaginable. Vivienne Caldwell's face twisted into something between a welcome smile and a sneer, like she'd bitten into something sour while trying to look pleasant for a photograph. Her eyes traveled slowly downward, my simple beige dress, my flat shoes, my drugstore earrings, and I watched her mentally calculate my value, find me worthless. She leaned toward her son, my fiancé, Daniel, and whispered something she assumed I couldn't hear, but I heard every single word. She said I looked like the cleaning staff who'd wandered in through the wrong entrance. And that's when I knew this dinner was going to be very, very interesting. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I have a confession to make. For the past 16 months, I've been keeping a secret from the man I was supposed to marry. Not a small secret, not a medium secret, a life-changing, jaw-dropping, completely deliberate secret. I earn $39,000 a month. Before taxes, it's even more staggering. After taxes, it's still the kind of number that makes financial advisors do a double take and ask if there's been some kind of error. I'm a principal software engineer at one of the largest technology companies in the Pacific Northwest. I've been writing code since I was 16, sold my first application at 23, and have been quietly climbing ever since. I hold 2 patents, I've presented at international technology summits, I have stock options that would make your eyes water, and Daniel thought I was a junior office coordinator who struggled to cover her monthly expenses. I never actually lied to him. When we met at a farmer's market 16 months ago, he asked what I did. I said I worked in software development. He nodded like he understood perfectly, then asked if I handled the administrative support for the engineering department. I smiled, said something vague about supporting various teams. He filled in the blanks himself, and I never corrected him. Why would I do something like that? Why would I let the man I was dating, the man I was genuinely falling for, believe I was barely making ends meet? Because I learned something important a very long time ago from the most significant person in my life. My grandmother Margaret raised me after my parents passed in a car accident when I was 8. She lived in a modest brick house on a quiet street, drove a sensible older sedan, shopped at neighborhood grocery stores, never wore anything extravagant. She taught me to prepare simple meals, to appreciate quiet mornings, to find joy in ordinary moments, to never, ever measure my worth by the number sitting in my bank account. What I didn't discover until she passed when I was 25 was that my grandmother Margaret was worth several $1,000,000. She had quietly built a small business portfolio in her younger years, invested with patience and discipline, and chosen to live simply, not because she had to, but because she genuinely believed that character outweighs appearance every single time. She left me everything, along with a handwritten letter I still keep in my nightstand drawer. In that letter, she wrote something I've carried with me every day since. She said, "A person's true character only surfaces when they believe no one important is watching, when they think you have nothing to offer them, when they assume you're beneath their notice. That's when you see exactly who they really are." Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I genuinely read every single one. So when Daniel invited me to dinner at his parents' estate, when he hinted this might be the evening things got serious between us, when he casually mentioned his mother was very particular about first impressions, I made a decision. I would give the Caldwell family the exact test my grandmother had taught me. I would arrive as the simple, unassuming, financially modest woman they already expected. Modest dress, old car, humble conversation. And I would watch. Watch how they treated someone they believed had nothing to offer, someone they assumed was beneath them, someone they'd already dismissed before I walked through the door. because what Vivienne Caldwell whispered to her son that evening told me everything I needed to know, and what I was about to discover over the next 3 hours would change absolutely everything. The Caldwell estate was exactly what I expected, and somehow still managed to shock me. The driveway alone was longer than most streets I'd lived on. The iron gates had gold accents, because apparently plain iron wasn't impressive enough. And standing in that grand foyer like a queen surveying her kingdom was Vivienne Caldwell, waiting to judge everything about me without knowing a single true thing. The Caldwell estate was exactly what I expected, and somehow still managed to surprise me with its excess. The driveway alone was longer than most streets I'd grown up on. The iron gates had gold-painted accents, because apparently plain iron wasn't statement enough. The lawn was manicured with the kind of obsessive precision that suggested someone measured each blade of grass individually. As I drove my 13-year-old Honda Civic up that pristine driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Simple makeup, hair pulled back in a low bun, my grandmother's small pearl studs, the only jewelry I wore. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong here. Perfect. Daniel met me at the front entrance with a kiss that felt slightly performative, like he was playing a role for an invisible audience. His eyes traveled quickly across my dress, my shoes, my complete lack of accessories, and I noticed something in his expression I had never seen before. Not embarrassment exactly, more like discomfort, like my appearance was a problem he hadn't anticipated. I filed that quietly away, for later. Inside, the house was a monument to new wealth desperately trying to resemble old money. Oversized crystal chandeliers hung from every ceiling. Oil paintings in gilded frames lined the hallways, though I noticed immediately they were high-quality prints, not originals. The furniture was visibly expensive, but stiff, uncomfortable looking, chosen entirely for appearance rather than comfort. And there, positioned in the center of the main foyer like royalty receiving visitors, was Vivienne Caldwell. She was in her early 60s with the kind of carefully maintained face that suggested several very skilled cosmetic professionals. Silver blonde hair styled into a perfect architectural shape, designer dress, real diamonds at her throat and wrists, and a smile so completely manufactured it practically had a patent number. She extended her hand toward me. I shook it and felt the limpness, the dismissal, the complete and deliberate absence of warmth. Then came the whisper to Daniel, the one about me looking like the cleaning staff. I smiled warmly, pretended I hadn't caught a single syllable. Vivienne studied me for another long moment, then gestured toward the dining room. "Dinner is almost ready. Do come in, Clara." She said my name like it was slightly distasteful, like she was trying it out and finding it wanting. I followed her inside, chin up, shoulders relaxed, completely calm. The dining room could have seated 30 people comfortably. Tonight there were 6 of us: Vivienne, her husband, Franklin Caldwell, Daniel's older sister, Brooke, Brooke's husband, whose name I immediately forgot because he spent the entire evening checking his phone, Daniel, and me. Franklin stood when I entered. At least he had basic manners. He was a tall man in his late 60s, silver-haired, distinguished-looking, with tired eyes that suggested a lifetime of managing Vivienne's expectations. He shook my hand firmly. "Welcome, Clara. Genuinely pleased you could join us." It was the warmest greeting I'd received since walking through the door, which wasn't saying much, but I appreciated it. Brooke looked me over with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years assessing threats. She was in her mid-30s, expensively dressed, perfectly highlighted hair, and eyes that were sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. She smiled. "How lovely. Daniel's told us so little about you." The emphasis on "so little" was deliberate. A small knife slipped between friendly words. I smiled back. All good things, I hope. She tilted her head. "Naturally." Quick pause. If Vivienne and Brooke are already making your blood boil, drop a comment saying Team Clara right now. Let me know you're with me. We sat. The first course arrived, a delicate seafood bisque that probably cost more per bowl than my weekly grocery budget, or rather, what they assumed my weekly grocery budget was. Vivienne wasted absolutely no time. So, Clara, Daniel mentioned you work in technology? Yes, I do. She nodded slowly. Support staff, something administrative? Something like that. I kept my voice light, modest, vague. She exchanged a microscopic glance with Brooke, a whole silent conversation conducted in one look. Message received, message understood. She's nobody. Franklin cleared his throat. Technology is a fascinating field. Lots of growth these days. Absolutely, I agreed pleasantly. It's been very good to me. Vivienne smiled tightly. I imagine entry-level positions can be quite comfortable for someone starting out. I took a slow sip of water, smiled softly, said nothing. Because here's what Vivienne Caldwell didn't know, what nobody at that table knew. 3 months earlier, I had received a single stock bonus, worth more than Franklin Caldwell's most profitable dealership year. But I just smiled and asked Vivienne about the beautiful painting behind her. She launched into a 15-minute explanation of its provenance, completely satisfied, already certain she'd established the hierarchy at that table. She had no idea the hierarchy was about to be completely dismantled, and that I was the one holding the blueprint. The dinner continued. Course after course, comment after comment, each one designed to remind me of my place. But it was what happened after dessert that changed everything, when Franklin Caldwell pulled me aside, away from Vivienne, away from Brooke, and said 7 words I never expected to hear from anyone at that table. Franklin Caldwell touched my elbow gently, just as Vivienne was leading Brooke toward the sitting room after dessert. He spoke quietly, almost carefully. Clara, would you mind joining me in the study for a moment? I glanced at Daniel. He was already following his mother. Didn't look back. Didn't notice. I followed Franklin down a narrow corridor lined with family photographs. Decades of Caldwell history mounted in expensive frames. Vacations in Europe, charity galas, business celebrations. A family portrait from what looked like the early 2000s. A younger Vivienne, a younger Franklin, 2 small children. Everyone smiling perfectly. Everyone performing happiness. He opened the study door, gestured me inside, closed it behind us. The room was different from the rest of the house. Quieter, simpler. Bookshelves lined every wall. Real books, actually read books. Spines cracked and worn from actual use. A large mahogany desk sat near the window, covered with papers and folders. A working desk, not a decorative one. Franklin settled into the chair behind it, gestured toward the seat across from him. I sat. He looked at me for a long moment, studying me the way a person studies something they're trying to understand. Not unkindly, just carefully. Then he said 7 words. You're not what you're pretending to be. The air shifted. I kept my expression completely neutral. I'm sorry? He leaned forward slightly, laced his fingers together on the desk. I spent 40 years in business, Clara. I've sat across from thousands of people, and I've learned to recognize 2 things very quickly. People who are nervous because they're out of their depth, and people who are calm because they know something nobody else in the room knows. He paused. You are very clearly the second kind. I looked at him steadily, said nothing. He continued. The way you handled Vivienne's questions at dinner, the way you deflected without lying, the way you observed everything while appearing to notice nothing, that's not the behavior of someone struggling financially. That's the behavior of someone running a very deliberate experiment. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear Vivienne's voice drifting down the corridor, sharp and certain, already rewriting the evening to suit her preferred narrative. I took a slow breath and decided something. Franklin Caldwell had earned a small portion of the truth. You're more perceptive than I expected. He smiled. First genuine smile I'd seen that evening. May I ask why? I folded my hands in my lap. Because I needed to know who your family really is before I make a permanent decision. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. Then he nodded slowly, like something had just confirmed itself for him. And what have you concluded? Quick pause. If Franklin is giving you unexpected feelings right now, drop a comment below. Is he trustworthy, or is this another trap? Tell me what you think. I looked around the study, at the worn books, at the working desk, at the tired eyes of a man who'd spent decades navigating a world Vivienne had built around him. I've concluded that your family is complicated. I said it carefully. Some members more than others. He laughed softly at that, a quiet sound, genuinely amused. That may be the most diplomatic assessment anyone has ever offered. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the manicured lawn glowing under exterior lights. Clara, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand it comes from a place of honest concern, not interference. I waited. My son is a good man in many ways, but he has spent his entire life being shaped by his mother's priorities that are not always aligned with genuine happiness. He turned to look at me. Vivienne has a specific vision for Daniel's future, a specific kind of partner, a specific arrangement, one that serves the family's social position first, and everything else a distant second. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and clarifying, like ice water on a hot day. You're warning me. He held my gaze. I'm being honest with you, because nobody else in this house will be, and because... He paused, chose his next words with visible care. Because you remind me of someone I used to know, someone who walked into this family a long time ago with clear eyes and genuine intentions, and walked out decades later wondering where those things had gone. The corridor outside had gone quiet. Vivienne's voice had stopped. Franklin straightened, moved back toward the desk. We should rejoin the others. He said it with the practiced ease of a man who'd had 1,000 conversations that needed to remain invisible. I stood, smoothed my dress, walked toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Franklin, why are you telling me this? He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, old and tired and complicated. Because Vivienne always wins, he said it quietly. She always gets exactly what she wants, and for once, he almost smiled, I'd like to see what happens when she doesn't. I walked back into that dining room a different person than the one that had left it, because Franklin Caldwell had just handed me something more valuable than a warning. He'd handed me an ally inside enemy territory. But what I didn't know yet was what Vivienne was planning in that sitting room while Franklin and I talked, what she was saying to Daniel, what she was arranging. And when I finally found out, the cold feeling in my chest turned into something else entirely. The sitting room was perfectly arranged, like everything else in this house, deliberately, purposefully, designed to communicate something specific to every person who entered it. In this case, that message was simple. You don't belong here. Vivienne was seated in a high-backed ivory chair near the fireplace, queen on her throne. Brooke sat to her left on the settee, elegant, alert, like a perfectly groomed guard dog in designer clothing. Daniel was perched on the edge of the sofa across from them, shoulders slightly forward, posture slightly collapsed, the way a person sits when they've been receiving instructions they're not entirely comfortable with. I noticed all of it in the 2 seconds it took me to cross the threshold. Vivienne looked up as I entered, that manufactured smile appearing instantly. Clara, come sit down. We were just talking about you. I'll bet you were. I smiled pleasantly, settled into the remaining chair, crossed my ankles, folded my hands. The picture of relaxed composure. How lovely, I said warmly. All good things, I hope. Vivienne's smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. Of course, we were actually discussing the future, Daniel's future specifically. I glanced at Daniel. He was looking at his hands. That told me everything. Vivienne continued, "Our family has a certain standing in this community. I'm sure you've noticed." I looked around the room, at the crystal, the paintings, the carefully constructed evidence of wealth and status. "I have, yes." She nodded. "That standing comes with certain responsibilities, certain expectations, for all members of our family, including those who might be considering joining it." There it was, delivered with a velvet glove, but unmistakably clear. I kept my expression open, curious. That makes complete sense. She seemed momentarily surprised by my easy agreement, had expected resistance, perhaps, or nervousness. Got neither. She recalibrated, continued. "Daniel has worked incredibly hard to build his position, his career, his reputation. We want to make sure that anyone entering his life enhances that position, rather than," she paused delicately, "complicates it." If Vivienne just made your jaw drop, drop a fire emoji in the comments right now because she's only just getting started. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then I smiled. Of course, a partner should be an asset, not a liability. Vivienne blinked. Precisely. Yes, exactly. She seemed pleased I understood so readily. Brooke was watching me with those sharp, calculating eyes, less convinced than her mother, sensing something she couldn't quite identify. I turned to Daniel, who still hadn't looked up. "Daniel?" He raised his eyes. "Is this a conversation you wanted to have tonight?" Something flickered across his face. Discomfort. Guilt, perhaps. Something that looked almost like apology. "Mom just wants what's best." He said it quietly. It came out sounding like something he'd rehearsed, like words he'd borrowed from someone else. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd spent 16 months building something real with, or so I'd believed. The man who'd remembered my grandmother's birthday, who'd driven 2 hours in a rainstorm to bring me soup when I was sick, who'd held my hand through a difficult work presentation, who'd made me laugh on ordinary Tuesday evenings. That man was still somewhere inside this person sitting across from me, but right now, in this room, he was something else entirely. He was Vivienne Caldwell's son, and that was the only identity she'd permitted him to carry tonight. Brooke leaned forward slightly. "Clara, what exactly are your career goals?" Her tone was pleasant, professionally curious, a perfect imitation of genuine interest. I turned to her. "I love what I do," I said simply. "I want to keep growing, keep building." She tilted her head. "And financially, are you stable?" The word stable landed with a particular weight, specific, pointed, like she'd practiced its delivery. I smiled. "I'm very comfortable. Thank you for asking." Vivienne jumped back in. "Because we've found that financial incompatibility," she chose the word with surgical precision, "can create such unnecessary strain in a relationship, especially as circumstances evolve, as families grow, as certain opportunities arise." I looked at her directly, for the first time all evening, really looked at her, at the calculation behind the courtesy, at the agenda wrapped in maternal concern, at the woman who'd decided my value before I walked through her front door, and was now very politely trying to convince her son to see what she saw. Nothing. I took a slow breath. "I completely agree," I said pleasantly. "Financial clarity is so important, don't you think?" Vivienne smiled victoriously. "Absolutely." She thought she'd won something. She thought this was the beginning of the end of Clara Bennett. She had absolutely no idea it was the beginning of everything she'd spent decades building. After that sitting room conversation, Daniel drove me home in almost complete silence, and when he finally spoke, what he said made me realize the test wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about him, and he was failing it in ways I hadn't anticipated. Daniel pulled up outside my apartment building. Engine running, neither of us speaking. The silence between us had a texture to it, heavy, uncomfortable, the kind of silence that holds things unsaid. Finally, he turned off the engine, stared straight ahead through the windshield. "I'm sorry about tonight." He said it quietly. I waited, let him continue. "Mom can be intense when she cares about something." I looked at his profile, the familiar line of his jaw, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was uncomfortable. I knew every small physical habit this man had, 16 months of paying attention. "And what does she care about?" I asked it gently, without accusation. He exhaled slowly. "The family reputation, the business, making sure everything fits together properly." Fits together properly. I repeated it quietly. He finally turned to look at me. "Clara, you have to understand. Growing up in that house, there were certain expectations, certain standards. It wasn't always easy. I know that." I looked at him steadily. "What kind of standards?" He shifted in his seat. "The kind that—" He stopped, started again. "Mom has this vision of what our lives should look like, who we should be with, what that person should bring to the family." I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, more like clarity arriving slowly. "And what do you think?" I asked it directly. "Do you share that vision?" He was quiet for too long. That silence was its own answer. "I think," he started carefully, "I think family harmony matters. I think it makes everything easier when the people you love get along, when things fit." I nodded slowly. "And if they don't fit?" Another long pause. "Then eventually things get complicated." Stop right here. If you felt that like a punch to the chest, you are not alone. Drop a comment telling me if you think Daniel deserves a second chance. I want to know. I looked out the passenger window, at the ordinary street outside my ordinary apartment building, the place Daniel had never once questioned me about, had never asked how I afforded it on an administrative coordinator's salary, had never noticed that the building was actually quite well maintained, that my apartment on the 4th floor had a river view, that I drove a 13-year-old Honda not because I couldn't afford better, but because I genuinely didn't care about cars. He'd filled in his own story about me and never once looked closely enough to question it. That realization settled somewhere uncomfortable. "Daniel," I turned back to him, "when you imagine your future, your actual future, not your mother's version, yours, what do you see?" He looked at me. Something moved through his expression, something real, something that looked almost like the man I'd fallen for at that farmer's market 16 months ago. "I see you." He said it softly. "I see a life that actually feels like mine, not a performance, not a production, something real." My chest tightened, because I believed him, and that was the most complicated part of all of this. I believed that Daniel Caldwell genuinely wanted something real. I just wasn't certain he was strong enough to choose it, when it cost him something, when it required him to stand in that sitting room and say, "Mom, enough," when it meant disappointing the woman who had spent 35 years defining his worth for him. I reached for the door handle. He put his hand gently on my arm. "Clara." I paused. "Whatever happens next," he struggled with something. "I need you to know that tonight this isn't how I wanted it to go." I looked at his hand on my arm, thought about everything I knew, everything I hadn't yet told him. The patents, the salary, the stock options, the grandmother's letter in my nightstand, the test I'd been quietly running for an entire evening, all the ways I'd watched his family reveal themselves, piece by piece, comment by comment, silence by silence. "I know." I said it gently. And I meant it. I got out of the car, walked to my building entrance, didn't look back. Upstairs in my apartment, I made chamomile tea, sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began writing down everything I'd observed that evening. Every comment Vivienne had made, every calculated silence from Brooke, every moment Daniel chose compliance over honesty, and one very unexpected conversation in a study lined with real books, with a tired man who handed me something I hadn't anticipated, an honest warning and the quiet suggestion that Vivienne Caldwell wasn't invincible. I documented everything that night because my grandmother had taught me something else besides character and worth. She taught me that preparation is the difference between hoping for justice and actually delivering it. 3 days after that dinner, Brooke called me. Not Vivienne, not Daniel, Brooke. And what she said during that phone call made everything I'd witnessed that evening suddenly make complete and terrifying sense. Brooke called on a Tuesday morning, 9:17 a.m. I was in a leadership meeting with 14 senior engineers, presenting quarterly architectural recommendations to our division director. I saw her name flash on my phone screen, declined the call quietly, sent a brief text. In a meeting, we'll call back within the hour. She responded immediately. It's important. Call me as soon as you can. That phrasing. It's important. Not urgent. Not an emergency. Important. Brooke Caldwell chose her words with the same precision her mother did. I noticed that immediately. The meeting ended at 10:30. I closed my office door, sat at my desk, called her back. She answered on the first ring. Clara? Thank you for calling. Her voice was different from the dinner, less performative, more direct. Something underneath it that I couldn't immediately identify. I appreciate you making time. I said it neutrally. What's on your mind? A brief pause. Then, I want to have an honest conversation with you. I leaned back in my chair, looked out my office window at the city spread below, 31 floors of distance between me and the street. I'm listening. Another pause, longer this time, like she was organizing something complicated. What happened at dinner the other night? She started carefully. My mother can be... Vivienne is very protective of Daniel, of the family. I waited, let her find her own path to wherever this was going. I understand that, I said simply. Brooke exhaled. Clara, I'm going to be direct with you, because I think you're someone who can handle directness. Please, go ahead. My mother has already spoken to Daniel. Since dinner, she's expressed her concerns about your... She paused delicately. Compatibility with the family, with Daniel's trajectory. I kept my voice completely even. What kind of concerns specifically? The kind that involve financial standing, social position, long-term contribution to the Caldwell name. Real quick, if Brooke is somehow making this worse instead of better, comment "Here we go" right now, because it gets so much more interesting. I stood up, walked to my office window, looked down at the city 31 floors below, at the thousands of people moving through their ordinary Tuesday morning, none of them aware that in an office high above them, a woman was being quietly and professionally evaluated for her financial usefulness, and found wanting. And the woman doing the evaluating had absolutely no idea who she was actually talking to. I appreciate the directness, I said calmly. Can I ask you something in return? Of course. Does Daniel know you're making this call? A pause that told me everything. Daniel and I are very close. That wasn't an answer. I noted it carefully. Brooke continued. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know the full picture before things progress further, before anyone gets hurt unnecessarily. My mother has a very specific vision for Daniel's future. She always has, and she has a way of making that vision happen, regardless of what anyone else wants. I turned away from the window, sat back down at my desk, picked up my pen, started writing notes on the legal pad beside my keyboard. Old habit, from years of documenting important conversations. What does that vision look like, exactly? Brooke was quiet for a moment. There's a woman, she said it carefully, a family friend, someone Vivienne has known for years, someone whose background, whose connections, whose financial standing aligns with what the Caldwells need right now. The pen stopped moving. I set it down slowly. Need? The business has had some challenges recently. Brooke said it with the practiced casualness of someone minimizing something significant. Some financial pressure, some restructuring, and a strategic partnership, through marriage, would help stabilize certain things. The room felt very still. I looked at the legal pad, at the neat, careful notes I'd been making without thinking. Words like strategic and partnership and stabilize. Words that turned a human relationship into a business transaction. Words that reduced Daniel to an asset and me to an obstacle. Brooke, I said her name quietly. Why are you telling me this? Another pause. This one felt different, less calculated, more human. Because I was the obstacle once, she said it quietly. Before I became useful, before my family's connections became convenient, and I know what it feels like to be evaluated instead of seen. Something shifted in my understanding of Brooke Caldwell. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. She was telling me the truth, or at least her version of it, because she knew something about being measured and found insufficient before the calculation changed in her favor. I picked up my pen again. Thank you for telling me. I said it and meant it. She exhaled. What will you do? I looked at the legal pad, at the neat, careful notes I'd been making, at the growing picture of a family that traded in people like commodities, and thought of my grandmother's letter, in my nightstand. 3 sentences in particular. When someone shows you their true architecture, believe them, study it carefully, and then decide whether you want to build something there or walk away clean. I didn't walk away, not yet, because what Brooke told me about the business challenges, about the financial pressure, about the strategic marriage plan gave me an idea, a very specific, very deliberate, very grandmother-approved idea. I spent 3 days thinking, not reacting, not crying, not calling Daniel to confront him, just thinking. My grandmother always said that the most powerful thing a person can do in a crisis is slow down completely. While everyone else speeds up, while everyone else panics, while everyone else scrambles to control the narrative, you slow down. You breathe. You think. So that's what I did. On the first day, I reviewed everything I knew. The dinner, Franklin's warning in the study, Brooke's careful phone call, the business challenges she'd mentioned so delicately, the strategic marriage plan Vivienne had apparently already set in motion, the other woman, the family friend, the one whose financial connections would conveniently solve the Caldwell family's current difficulties. I wrote it all down on my legal pad, in neat, careful columns. What I knew, what I suspected, and what I needed to find out. On the second day, I made some calls, professional calls, to people I'd worked with over the years, people who understood financial structures and business architecture, people who knew how to research quietly, discreetly, without leaving obvious footprints. I gave them the Caldwell name, the automotive business name, the general geographical area, asked for a comprehensive picture. They came back to me within 24 hours, because that's what happens when you've spent 14 years building genuine professional relationships. People move quickly for you. What they found was illuminating. The Caldwell Automotive Dealership Group, 4 locations across 2 states, had indeed been experiencing significant financial pressure. Not minor restructuring challenges, not temporary cash flow issues. Significant, mounting, urgent. 3 of the 4 locations were underperforming badly. 2 had missed consecutive franchise requirements. There were outstanding loans against business assets, vendor relationships under strain, a franchise review scheduled with the manufacturer, the kind of review that could end everything if the results weren't favorable. The Caldwell empire wasn't struggling, it was quietly collapsing, and Vivienne needed a solution. Fast. If the picture is starting to come together for you right now, drop a comment saying, "I see it," because there's still so much more to uncover. On the third day, I called Franklin. I had his number from a business card he'd pressed into my hand at the end of the dinner evening. Quietly, without Vivienne noticing. He answered on the second ring. "Clara." He said my name like he'd been expecting this call, like he'd been waiting for it. "Mr. Caldwell, I hope I'm not disturbing you." Not at all. His voice was careful, private. The background was quiet. I assumed he was away from the house, away from Vivienne. I wanted to follow up on our conversation, from the study. A brief pause. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I looked at the legal pad on my kitchen table, at the neat columns of everything I'd gathered over 3 days. "I've done some research," I said it simply, "on the business situation." Another pause, longer this time, more weighted. "I see." He said it quietly. "And how much do you know?" "Enough." I said it without drama, without accusation, just factually. Enough to understand the full picture. He exhaled slowly, the sound of someone setting down something heavy they'd been carrying for a very long time. Then, "Clara," he said my name carefully, "I think it's time I told you something else, something I should have said the other evening." I waited, let him find his own pace. "Vivienne didn't just have concerns about your compatibility," he started slowly. "She's been actively working to end your relationship with Daniel for the past 3 weeks. Before the dinner even happened, before you set foot in this house, she'd already made her decision about you. The dinner was never an evaluation. It was a formality, a performance for Daniel's benefit, to give him the impression he'd had the chance to introduce you properly before she moved forward with her alternative plan." I looked out my apartment window, at the river moving steadily below, unhurried, continuous, indifferent to whatever dramas played out on its banks. "You underestimated her," Franklin said it quietly, significantly. "And I think," he paused, "I think that's going to cost her, if you're willing." I picked up my pen, turned to a fresh page on the legal pad, and I thought about my grandmother, about character, about patience, about the difference between revenge and justice. And I started writing, because Franklin Caldwell had just handed me something extraordinary. Not just information, not just an ally, a key to the exact door Vivienne had been guarding her entire life. But before I could use that key, Daniel called, and what he said during that conversation told me that Vivienne had already made her next move, a move I hadn't anticipated, one that changed my timeline completely. Daniel called at 7:43 in the evening. I was at my kitchen table, legal pad open, notes spread across the surface, building a careful documented picture of everything I knew, everything Franklin had shared, everything Brooke had revealed without fully intending to. His name appeared on my phone screen. I set down my pen, answered. "Hey." His voice was tight, strained, like a wire pulled slightly past its comfortable tension. "Hey," I said it calmly. "What's going on?" He exhaled, long and slow. "Can we meet tomorrow morning? Just you and me. No family, no dinner parties, just us." I looked at the notes spread across my table, at the careful columns of information, at the picture assembling itself with quiet precision. "Of course. Where?" "The coffee shop, where we first met." He said it like it meant something specific to him, like he was reaching for something solid in a moment that felt unsteady. "9 a.m.? 9 a.m., I said it simply. He went quiet for a moment. Then, "Clara," he said my name like it cost him something. "I just want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes out of this conversation, what I feel is real." I looked at the river through my window, dark and steady in the evening light. "I know," I said it gently. "I know you do." We said goodnight. I set my phone face down on the table, looked at my notes, at the fresh page I'd started after Franklin's call, at the word I'd written at the top in clear, careful letters, "timeline." And underneath it, one sentence, Vivienne has already made her next move. I just didn't know what that move was. I found out the next morning. The coffee shop was small, independent, the kind of place that had been on the same corner for 20 years. Same chipped counter, same handwritten menu board, same smell of good coffee and something baking in the back. We'd met here 16 months ago, both reaching for the last blueberry scone at the same moment, both pulling back, both insisting the other take it, eventually splitting it down the middle on a paper napkin, talking for 3 hours without noticing the time. I arrived first, ordered chamomile tea, found a table by the window, the same table we'd sat at that first afternoon. I don't know why that detail felt important. It just did. Daniel arrived 7 minutes later. He looked like he hadn't slept well. Dark shadows under his eyes, jacket slightly rumpled, hair not quite as carefully arranged as usual. He ordered black coffee, sat down across from me, wrapped both hands around the cup, like he needed something solid to hold on to. We sat quietly for a moment, the comfortable kind of quiet that only exists between people who've spent enough time together to stop filling silence unnecessarily. Then he looked up. Mom called a legal attorney. He said it without preamble, just delivered it directly. I kept my expression neutral. When? 4 days ago, before the dinner. She wanted to understand the legal framework around. He stopped, pressed his lips together. Around prenuptial agreements, specifically structured ones that protect family business assets in the event of a marriage that, he struggled with the next word, underperforms. That word, underperforms, applied to a marriage, applied to a human relationship, like a quarterly business report, like a franchise location missing its targets. Pause right here. If that word just made your stomach turn, drop a comment saying underperforms, because we all need to acknowledge how completely wrong that is. I picked up my tea, took a slow, careful sip, set it down. And Daniel? I asked it quietly. What did you tell her? He looked at his coffee, at the table surface, at somewhere that wasn't my face. I told her I needed to think. I waited, that I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet, that I wanted to talk to you first. I nodded slowly, and she accepted that? He almost smiled, something tired and rueful crossing his face. Mom doesn't really accept things, she just adjusts her approach. I looked at him steadily. What does that mean specifically? He finally met my eyes. She's planning something. I don't know exactly what, but I know her. When she goes quiet, when she stops pushing directly, it means she's already moved to another angle, one you don't see coming, because she's done arguing the front door and found a window somewhere. I thought about Franklin, about Richard Harmon, about the franchise review in 6 weeks, about the legal pad on my kitchen table, about the careful columns of everything I'd assembled, about windows, and who actually had access to them. Daniel, I said his name carefully, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to answer me honestly, not as Vivienne's son, as yourself. He straightened slightly. Okay, I held his gaze directly. If you had to choose, right now, between your mother's version of your life and something real, something that was actually yours, what would you choose? The coffee shop hummed quietly around us. Someone laughed at the counter. The coffee machine hissed. Rain started tapping against the window beside our table. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Complex, layered. The particular look of a person standing at the edge of something they've been avoiding for a long time. Then he reached across the table, put his hand over mine. I would choose real, he said it quietly, every single time. And sitting in that coffee shop, rain against the window, his hand over mine, I made a decision. I was going to give Daniel Caldwell one genuine chance to prove he meant it before everything changed completely. 2 weeks later, Vivienne made her move, the one Daniel had warned me about, the window she'd found while pretending to accept the front door. And when I saw what she'd arranged, I knew my original timeline had to accelerate significantly. Vivienne's move came on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the coffee shop. Daniel called me at 6:45. His voice had that tight quality again, that wire pulled past comfortable tension quality. Mom's organized a dinner, he said it carefully. This Saturday, at the estate. A small gathering, just family and a few close friends. She wants you there. I was standing in my kitchen, making pasta, the ordinary rhythm of an ordinary evening. I stirred the sauce slowly. How many people? Around 20. He said it like the number was irrelevant. And these close friends? I said it neutrally. Anyone specific? He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. The Harrington family will be there. I kept stirring. Are they old family friends? Long pause. They have a daughter. He said it without dressing it up, without softening it, just delivered it plainly, the way a person delivers information they're ashamed of but unable to change. Serena Harrington, 29 years old. Family has significant financial interests in commercial real estate, development projects across 3 states, the kind of connections that would be... He stopped. Useful. I finished it for him. His silence confirmed it. I set down the wooden spoon, turned off the burner. And this is the woman your mother has selected. The word selected sat in the air between us. He didn't deny it. And you're telling me because I want you there. He said it firmly. Because this is my life, not hers, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Clara, I meant what I said at the coffee shop. I'm choosing real. I just need you to trust me one more time. I looked at my kitchen, at the half-made pasta dinner, at the ordinary, comfortable life I'd built entirely on my own terms, at the legal pad on the corner of my counter, still covered with careful notes, still building toward something. Saturday, I said it simply. What time? 7 p.m. I'll pick you up. No, I'll meet you there. Stop right here. If you think Clara should run, drop a comment. If you think she should go and finish this, drop a fire emoji. I need to know where you stand. I spent Friday on 2 things. First, I called Richard Harmon directly. Franklin had provided his personal number, along with a brief introductory message sent ahead of my call, so Richard was expecting to hear from me. He answered professionally, warmly, asked intelligent questions, listened without interrupting. I walked him through everything I'd assembled, the financial picture, the franchise performance issues, the loan structures, the vendor relationships, the pattern of decisions that had created the current situation. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he said something that surprised me. Miss Bennett, how long did it take you to compile this? About 3 days. Another pause. 3 days. He repeated it quietly. Our internal review team has been working on this file for 6 weeks, and you've just given me a clearer picture than anything they've produced. I looked at my legal pad, at the neat columns, at the careful documented architecture of everything I'd gathered. I've had good teachers. He asked if I'd be willing to provide a formal statement, documented, verifiable, completely factual, nothing speculative, nothing personal, just the financial picture as I understood it, based on the research I'd conducted. I said yes. We arranged the specifics. He thanked me, said Franklin had described me accurately. I asked what Franklin had said. He paused. He said you were the kind of person who understood that real strength doesn't announce itself. I sat with that for a moment, thought about my grandmother, about her modest house, her sensible car, her handwritten letter, her several $1 million nobody knew about until she was gone. Real strength doesn't announce itself. Second, I called Brooke. She answered on the 3rd ring, guarded, careful. Clara. Brooke, I need to ask you something directly. Of course. Saturday evening, are you planning to attend? A pause. Longer. Yes, Mom expects the whole family present to support the... She stopped herself. To support the gathering. I need you to do something for me. Another pause. Longer. What kind of something? The kind that requires you to decide once and for all whether you're your mother's instrument or your own person. The silence on the line was significant, long enough to mean something, long enough to suggest genuine consideration. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, quieter, something underneath it that sounded almost like relief. What do you need? I looked at my legal pad, at the final column I'd been building, the one labeled Saturday. I need you to make sure that Franklin is present in the main room at 8 p.m. exactly, and I need you to make sure that as many guests as possible were within earshot of whatever conversation happens then. Brooke was very quiet. I could hear her breathing, steady, careful. Then, can I ask what's going to happen? I thought about Vivienne, about the manufactured smile, the limpness of her handshake, the whisper about the cleaning staff, the attorney call 4 days before a dinner she'd staged as an evaluation, the strategic marriage plan, the other woman, the franchise review, the window she'd found while pretending to accept the front door. I thought about my grandmother, about character surfaces when no one important is watching, about real strength not announcing itself. And I thought about all the ways Vivienne Caldwell had built her life on the assumption that people with less visible power had no power at all. She was about to discover how profoundly she'd miscalculated. Saturday arrived. I spent the morning completely calm, made tea, read, took a long walk. Because my grandmother also taught me this: the most important moments in life deserve a settled mind, and what was about to happen at the Caldwell estate deserved my very best. I arrived at the Caldwell estate at 7:15, 15 minutes early. Deliberate. I wanted to see the room before it filled completely, wanted to understand the physical geography of the evening, where people would stand, where conversations would cluster, where sound would carry, where Vivienne would position herself. The valet looked at my 13-year-old Honda with visible confusion. I handed him the keys pleasantly. "Thank you." He recovered professionally, took the keys, drove away slowly, like he was genuinely uncertain the car would make it to the parking area. It would. It always did. I walked up the entrance steps. Same iron gates, same gold accents, same aggressively manicured lawn glowing under exterior lights. But tonight, the estate was lit differently, more warmly, more deliberately, the kind of lighting that says this is a celebration, this is an occasion, this matters. String lights in the garden, candles on every surface inside, fresh flowers in arrangements that probably cost more than my first month's rent at 22. 20 guests had become closer to 50. I noted that quietly, filed it away. A small, intimate gathering had expanded significantly. Vivienne was thorough. Whatever she was staging tonight, she wanted an audience. Daniel was near the entrance when I walked in. He saw me immediately. Something in his face shifted. Relief, complicated by something else I couldn't immediately name. He crossed the room toward me. "You came," he said it quietly. "Of course." He looked at me carefully, really looked, the way he had at the farmer's market 16 months ago, before he'd constructed his own story about who I was. "You look..." He stopped, started again. "You look like yourself tonight." I almost smiled at that, because tonight I was wearing something different, not the simple beige dress from the first dinner, not the careful costume of modest invisibility. Tonight I was wearing a deep emerald dress, simple cut, exceptional fabric, the kind of garment that doesn't announce itself loudly but rewards a second look completely. My grandmother's pearl earrings and a pendant she'd left me, small,
gold, a family piece that had belonged to 4 generations of women before me. Nothing flashy, nothing performative, just real. The kind of real that doesn't need to prove anything. Daniel offered his arm. I took it. We walked into the main room together. Vivienne saw me from across the room. I watched her process what she was looking at, the dress, the posture, the complete absence of the nervous deference she'd catalogued at the first dinner. Something shifted behind her eyes. Recalculation. She crossed toward us with practiced grace. "Clara, how wonderful you could join us." Her smile was intact, perfectly maintained, but something underneath it was working harder than usual. "How lovely of you to include me." I said it warmly. "Your home looks beautiful this evening." She accepted the compliment with a slight incline of her head, like royalty acknowledging tribute. Then her eyes moved deliberately across the room, drawing my attention to follow, toward a small cluster of guests near the fireplace, a man in his 60s, silver-haired, distinguished, and beside him, a young woman, late 20s, classically beautiful, expensively dressed, standing with the practiced ease of someone who'd been prepared for this exact moment. Serena Harrington. If Vivienne just sent your blood pressure up, comment, "Not today, Vivienne," because tonight is not going the way she planned. Vivienne began moving toward the fireplace, a gentle but unmistakable suggestion that we should follow. I didn't move. Daniel noticed, glanced at me. I looked at him steadily. One small nod, almost imperceptible. He understood something in it. I wasn't sure exactly what, but his posture changed, slightly, subtly, like a person deciding which direction to face into a wind. At 7:59 p.m., I excused myself quietly, moved toward the entrance corridor, found Franklin standing near the study doorway, exactly where Brooke had positioned him. He looked at me steadily, his tired eyes carrying something new tonight, something that looked almost like anticipation. "Ready?" He asked it simply. I nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a folded document, held it toward me. "Richard Harmon sent this today." I took it, opened it carefully, read the brief, formal letter inside. The franchise review had been moved forward from 6 weeks out to Monday morning, based on new information provided by an independent financial consultant whose comprehensive analysis had raised significant concerns, requiring immediate attention. The manufacturer representative would arrive at 9 a.m. Monday with a complete audit team and full authority to make binding decisions about the franchise agreement. I refolded the letter carefully, handed it back to Franklin. He tucked it away, looked at me with those tired, complicated eyes. "You understand what happens after tonight." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said it simply. He nodded slowly. Then something crossed his face, something I hadn't seen there before. Peace. The particular peace of a person who has finally decided to stop carrying something that was never theirs to carry alone. The clock on the mantel showed 7:59, 1 minute. Franklin straightened his jacket, walked toward the main room. I followed. Brooke was already positioned near the center of the space, casual, natural, as though she'd simply drifted there, but her eyes found mine immediately, sharp and ready. 20 guests nearby, conversations humming, candles flickering, string lights glowing through the garden windows. Vivienne standing near the fireplace, beside Serena Harrington and her father, beside Daniel, who was looking across the room directly at me. And at 8 p.m. exactly, Franklin Caldwell walked to the center of his own home and said the 7 words that changed everything. In front of 50 guests, in front of his wife, in front of the woman she'd selected to replace me, in front of the man she'd spent 35 years trying to own completely. What Franklin said in front of those 50 guests made the room go completely silent, And what happened in the 60 seconds that followed dismantled everything Vivienne Caldwell had spent decades building, one careful truth at a time.
Franklin walked to the center of the room, unhurried, deliberate, the walk of a man who had made a decision and was completely at peace with it. The nearest conversations began trailing off, people sensing something, that particular shift in atmosphere that happens when the temperature of a room changes without anyone touching a thermostat. Franklin stopped, looked around slowly, at the guests, at the candles, at the string lights glowing through the garden windows, at 50 years of a life built inside these walls. Then he looked at Vivienne, standing near the fireplace, beside Serena Harrington, beside Daniel. Her expression was already changing, that manufactured smile developing small fractures, subtle but there. Franklin. She said his name like a warning, quiet, controlled. He ignored it completely. Ladies and gentlemen. His voice was clear, steady, carrying easily across the room without effort. The remaining conversations dissolved, 50 people orienting toward him, sensing significance. I've been a quiet man most of my life. He said it simply. Some of you know that about me. I've let others speak, let others decide, let others construct the narrative of what this family is and what it stands for. A few knowing glances exchanged among the older guests, people who'd watched Franklin occupy the background of his own life for decades. But tonight, I want to say something true. He paused, let the word true settle. For the first time in a very long time. The room was completely silent now. Even the staff near the kitchen doorway had stopped moving. My wife has spent this evening, he continued carefully, attempting to orchestrate a particular outcome for our son's future, with the best of intentions. He added that last part with genuine fairness. I want to acknowledge that. Vivienne's intentions have always been about protecting this family. Vivienne's expression was a remarkable thing to observe. The smile was entirely gone now, replaced by something controlled, tightly controlled, the expression of someone watching a situation move beyond their management, for the first time possibly ever. If Franklin is becoming your favorite person in this entire story, drop a comment saying Franklin for the win, because he's not finished yet. But protection and control, Franklin continued, are not the same thing, and I've confused them for too long. Our son is 35 years old. He's built a career through genuine ability. He's a good man with good instincts, when he's permitted to use them. Daniel was very still across the room, standing beside Serena Harrington, who looked increasingly uncertain about what she'd walked into this evening. Her father beside her was already recalculating. I could see it in his posture, the slight lean backward, the careful repositioning of a businessman recognizing an unstable situation. And the woman my son has chosen, Franklin's eyes found me across the room, is someone I should have spoken about honestly, much earlier, much more directly. Clara Bennett is not who Vivienne assumed she was. The room shifted, that particular collective intake of breath that 50 people make simultaneously when something unexpected lands. Vivienne took one step forward. Franklin, her voice was still controlled, but only barely. I think this isn't the moment for... It's exactly the moment. He said it gently, but without any flexibility inside it. Clara, he looked me directly. Would you mind? I walked forward, beside Franklin, feeling 50 pairs of eyes. Vivienne's among them, the sharpest, the most dangerous, the most suddenly uncertain. I looked around the room, at the faces, some curious, some confused, some already sensing what was coming. Brooke was near the back, expression carefully neutral, but her eyes were bright. I'm a principal software engineer. I said it simply, at Meridian Technologies. I've been with the company for 9 years. I hold 2 patents. I've presented at 14 international technology conferences. I have a stock portfolio that, I paused briefly, would surprise most people in this room. The silence was absolute. I earned $39,000 monthly before equity compensation. I let that number exist in the air for a moment, without drama, without performance, just factually, the way my grandmother had always handled truth, quietly, completely, without apology. Vivienne's face, the face that had whispered about cleaning staff, that had staged a dinner as a dismissal before it began, that had arranged a strategic replacement before her son had even made a decision, that face was completely still, the kind of stillness that comes after something structural gives way. Franklin continued. Clara brought something else to my attention recently, something I, as chairman of Caldwell Automotive, should have identified myself, but didn't, because I trusted that the people managing our operations were being transparent with me. He looked at Vivienne. They were not. The room temperature dropped noticeably. The franchise review has been moved to Monday morning. He said it clearly. A full audit team will be on site at 9 a.m., reviewing 3 years of financial management decisions, 3 years of records, 3 years of choices that were made without board knowledge, without shareholder transparency, without my knowledge as chairman. Vivienne's composure finally, visibly cracked. Franklin, her voice came out different, thinner, smaller than I'd ever heard. This isn't, you cannot, in front of everyone. He looked at her steadily, with something that was neither cruelty nor coldness, just clarity, the particular clarity of a man who'd carried weight for 30 years and had finally set it down, something he'd decided to do, carefully, deliberately, and completely. And that's when Daniel moved, across that silent room, past Serena Harrington, past his mother, past 35 years of constructed expectation, and stopped beside me. What Daniel said when he reached me, in front of 50 guests, in front of his mother, in front of the woman she'd selected to replace me, I didn't expect. Not those words, not that publicly, not with everything else already unraveling around us. Daniel stopped beside me, close enough that I could hear him breathing, steady, deliberate, the breathing of someone who had made a decision and was no longer afraid of it. He turned to face the room, 50 people watching, his mother across the space, expression fractured, composure finally and completely gone. Serena Harrington near the fireplace, looking at a situation she hadn't agreed to walk into, her father already reaching for his phone, already composing his exit. Brooke near the back wall, something on her face I'd never seen there before. Pride, quiet, genuine, the particular pride of someone watching a person they love finally choose correctly. Daniel spoke. I owe everyone in this room an honest moment. His voice was clear, steady, the voice of a man speaking from somewhere real, not performing, not managing, not navigating, just speaking. I've spent most of my adult life trying to meet expectations that were never actually mine, trying to build a version of myself that fit a blueprint someone else drew. I got good at it, good enough that I sometimes forgot it wasn't real. He looked at his mother, not with anger, not with accusation, with something more complicated, more honest. Mom, he said it gently, I know you love me. I know everything you've done has come from wanting the best for this family, for me. Vivienne's eyes were bright, her jaw tight, every muscle in her face working to maintain something that had already gone. But the best for me, he continued quietly, isn't a strategic arrangement. It isn't a financial merger dressed as a marriage. It's someone who sees me clearly and chooses me anyway. Someone who's been more honest with me in 16 months than most people manage in a lifetime. He turned to look at me then, directly, completely, the way he'd looked at me over a split scone on a paper napkin 16 months ago, before everything had gotten complicated, before families and expectations and strategic arrangements had entered the space between us. Clara, he said my name quietly, I owe you an apology for every moment I let someone else's agenda take up space that should have been yours, for every time I chose compliance over honesty, For every dinner and conversation and silence where I should have stood up and didn't. I looked at him, this complicated, genuinely decent, finally standing upright man, and I felt something settle. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or grand gestures, just quietly, the way real things settle. Last engagement call, if this moment just made you exhale, drop a comment saying, finally, because 16 months of patience just arrived somewhere worth going. Vivienne moved, crossed the room towards us, her voice recovered enough to carry. Daniel, this is not. You don't understand what you're. We need to discuss this privately before you. Franklin stepped forward, quietly, without drama. Vivienne, just her name, said with 38 years of marriage inside it, and the particular tone of someone who had decided that certain conversations were finished. She stopped, looked at her husband, at his expression, at something she apparently found there that she hadn't expected, something immovable. The room held its breath. Then Vivienne Caldwell did something I hadn't predicted. She straightened, smoothed her dress, lifted her chin, and walked calmly towards the corridor leading to her private sitting room, without another word, the exit of a woman who understood she had lost this particular engagement and was already recalculating the next. Some things don't change overnight, but some things change, irrevocably, in a single evening, in front of 50 witnesses, with the truth standing quietly in the center of a candlelit room. Serena Harrington touched her father's arm. They exchanged a brief look. He nodded. They crossed to Franklin, exchanged brief, polite words, and left, gracefully, without drama, the exit of people who understood a situation clearly and made sensible decisions accordingly. The remaining guests began finding their voices again, slowly, the particular hum of 50 people processing something significant. Brooke appeared beside me. She said nothing for a moment, just stood there. Then, quietly, she did something I hadn't anticipated either. She touched my arm, briefly, gently. "Welcome to the family," she said it simply, then moved away, towards Franklin, who was standing near the window, looking out at the garden his wife had designed, at the roses and the string lights, and the careful, beautiful architecture of a life built on performance. I stood beside Daniel. We were quiet for a moment, the good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. "What happens now?" he asked it softly. I thought about Monday morning, about Richard Harmon and his audit team, about 3 years of financial records, about consequences arriving on schedule, about a franchise review that would tell the truth whether anyone wanted it to or not. I thought about my grandmother's pendant, her modest house, her sensible car, her handwritten letter. A person's true character only surfaces when no one important is watching. I closed the news article, picked up my coffee, looked out at the morning, at the ordinary, beautiful, unremarkable morning that was entirely, completely mine. Thank you so much for watching. If this story stayed with you, more of my most powerful stories are already on your screen right now. Click one and don't miss what comes next. I promise you, you won't regret it. See you in the next one.